Frozen grief. Sorrow buried beneath the mask. As a result, Shinra's grief became frozen. It remained perfectly preserved within his subconscious, a heavy emotional weight that did not age or mature as his body grew. This frozen grief manifests as a persistent low-grade emotional numbness punctuated by bursts of extreme protective anger. He cannot easily access his deep sadness because doing so threatens to melt the frozen barrier holding his entire psyche together. If he allows himself to fully feel the absolute agony of losing his mother and brother, he risks being completely overwhelmed by the pain. This frozen state is actively maintained by his survivor's guilt. Shinra's internal emotional logic dictates that he does not have the right to live a peaceful, emotionally balanced life while his family remains lost in the dark. His survival is a debt that must be constantly paid through continuous, exhausting self-sacrifice. He denies himself the space to heal because, on a subconscious level, he believes that his suffering is the only honest way to remain connected to the family he lost. Ambiguous loss and the disruption of the mourning loop. The fragile stability of Shinra's frozen grief was completely upended by the earth-shattering revelation that his younger brother, Kusakabe, did not die in the initial fire but was stolen, raised in total isolation by the evangelist, and transformed into a cold, lethal commander of the white-clad forces. Within the field of trauma psychology, this event shifts Shinra's mental burden from traditional static grief into a highly complex state known as ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss is widely recognized by clinicians as one of the most agonizing and destructive forms of psychological trauma an individual can endure. It occurs when a primary attachment figure is physically present but psychologically or emotionally entirely absent, or vice versa. In Shinra's case, the ambiguity is absolute and dual-layered. For years, Sho existed as a clear, static memory, a tragic loss that Shinra's mind could eventually learn to categorize under the finality of death. The discovery that Sho is alive completely dismantles that finality, forcing Shinra into a state of chronic psychological suspension. The ghost is flesh. The brother Shinra spent a decade mourning is now standing directly in front of him as an active, living adversary. The grief can no longer be processed as a historical event. It is an ongoing, real-time crisis. The erasure of shared identity. When they finally meet, Sho looks at Shinra with absolute apathy. He has no memory of their mother, no recollection of their childhood safety, and no emotional attachment to his name. To Sho, Shinra is not a brother. He is merely an ideological enemy to be eliminated. The agony of the reach. Shinra is forced to look at the physical body of his brother while realizing that the mind and soul of the child he loved have been completely erased and replaced by a lethal cult identity. This creates an intense state of psychological paralysis. Shinra cannot fully mourn the brother who is dead, nor can he easily embrace the brother who is alive. His mind becomes trapped in an endless loop of hope and rejection. Every time he fights Sho, he is trying to perform an emergency emotional rescue, desperately searching for any fracture in Sho's cold exterior where the original brother might still exist. The pursuit of Sho ceases to be a tactical mission for the Fire Force. It becomes an obsessive struggle to rescue his own sanity and validate his entire life history. Special Fire Force Company 8 and the Reconstitution of Safety. One of the most accurate psychological insights of Fire Force is its absolute rejection of the individualistic recovery narrative. Popular culture frequently promotes the myth that a broken person can heal themselves through sheer isolation, inner grit, and independent contemplation. Modern trauma psychology completely contradicts this concept. Wounds that are inflicted by social rejection, systemic hostility, and broken attachments can only be fully healed through radical social safety, consistent interpersonal mirroring, and relational repair. This is the profound therapeutic role filled by Special Fire Force Company 8. Company 8 does not function merely as a military or civil defense unit. It operates as an optimized therapeutic community. When Shinra first enters the compound, his psychological defenses are set to maximum alert. He expects the same environment he has known his entire life: whispered insults, suspicious glances, and a collective fear of his smile. He uses protective distancing, a behavioral strategy where an individual keeps others at a strict emotional distance to avoid the inevitable pain of rejection. However, Company 8 systematically dismantles these defenses through the weaponization of radical, boring consistency. Nervous system down-regulates, emotional safety is established. Day after day, the members of the 8th do not react with fear when his facial muscles lock into a jagged grin. They do not treat his volatile power as an omen of destruction, but as an asset to be respected. They openly invite him into their daily routines, sharing meals, engaging in group workouts, and cleanup chores. This consistent exposure to unconditional acceptance creates an environment where Shinra's hypervigilant nervous system can finally begin to downregulate. For the first time since the fire, he is not required to fight for his right to exist inside his own home. The 8th provides a secure base, a safe harbor from which he can begin to examine his internal wounds without the immediate pressure of survival. Akitaru Obi as the corrective attachment figure. Within the architecture of Company 8, Captain Akitaru Obi fulfills a critical psychological role. He serves as Shinra's corrective attachment figure. In attachment theory, when an individual's early relationship with primary caregivers is violently severed or marked by trauma, the mind carries a deep-seated model of authority as either untrustworthy, abusive, or utterly helpless. To heal this wound, the individual must encounter a healthy authority figure who consistently demonstrates safety, emotional maturity, and absolute reliability, allowing the brain to rewire its relational expectations. Captain Obi is uniquely qualified to serve this function precisely because of one defining characteristic. He possesses no pyrokinetic abilities whatsoever. In the universe of Fire Force, power is currency and fire is traditionally linked with either destruction or genetic superiority. Obi breaks this entire paradigm. He is a normal human who has built his immense physical strength through relentless mundane discipline and weight training. This carry massive psychological weight for Shinra. Throughout Shinra's life, value was always tied to utility and threat capability. People either feared his fire or wanted to use it. Obi treats his fire as a tool, but treats Shinra's character as the true source of value. Obi evaluates Shinra through a lens of profound moral clarity and deep empathy. He does not flinch at Shinra's devilish grin. Instead, he looks directly past the somatic defense mechanism to see the honorable young man underneath. When the media or external military forces try to demonize Shinra, Obi stands as an unyielding physical and institutional shield, taking the blows meant for his subordinate. He offers a model of strength that is completely divorced from supernatural destruction. By witnessing Obi's unwavering commitment to human life, dignity, and protective leadership, Shinra learns that true power is not the ability to burn things down, but the capacity to carry the weight of others. Obi lends Shinra his own structural stability, acting as an emotional anchor that allows the young soldier to gradually rebuild his fractured self-esteem. The psychology of healthy rivalry, Arthur Boyle as the unflinching mirror. While Captain Obi provides the structural safety of a father figure, Arthur Boyle provides the critical psychological counterweight of an unyielding peer. Traditional shonen rivalries are often constructed around toxic envy, mutual insecurity, or an escalating arms race of personal power. The relationship between Shinra and Arthur operates on a much more sophisticated psychological plane. It is a highly therapeutic interaction between two distinct forms of trauma adaptation. Both Shinra and Arthur are deeply broken individuals who experience profound childhood isolation, but their minds chose opposite paths to survive reality. Shinra chose the path of extreme reality and hyper-purpose. He accepted the horror of his past and sought to conquer it by becoming a real-world savior. Arthur, conversely, chose the path of extreme psychological dissociation and fantasy. He escaped the painful reality of his abandonment by constructing an elaborate internal medieval delusion wherein he is a noble, chosen Night King. This structural contrast makes them the perfect absurd mirrors for one another. Arthur is completely immune to Shinra's tragic narrative and his intimidating defense mechanisms. When Shinra flashes his terrifying involuntary grin, society flees in horror. Arthur simply looks at him and calls him an idiot. Entirely unfazed by the somatic mask, Arthur does not offer Shinra the heavy, suffocating pity that well-meaning civilians often provide, a pity that only reinforces Shinra's status as a damaged outsider. Instead, Arthur treats Shinra as an absolute equal, demanding constant competition, bickering, and accountability. This interaction is profoundly healing for Shinra. By treating him as a frustrating peer rather than a delicate trauma victim or a dangerous monster, Arthur yanks Shinra out of his internal pit of self-absorbed tragedy and forces him to engage directly in the immediate, grounding reality of the present moment. Their constant arguments are a safe space where conflict does not mean abandonment. No matter how intense their bickering becomes, Arthur remains present on the battlefield, standing back to back with Shinra against absolute annihilation. Arthur provides Shinra with the invaluable gift of a normal, chaotic, and completely dependable friendship. The reconstitution of the soul from the ashes of hell. The final evolution of Shinra Kusakabe represents the ultimate triumph of psychological resilience over systemic trauma. Resilience is not the absence of vulnerability, nor is it the ability to pass through suffering entirely unchanged. True resilience is the capacity to integrate severe trauma into a complex, mature, and unified sense of self. It is the understanding that while the fire destroyed the original self, the new self, built from the remaining ashes, can become something profoundly strong, deeply empathetic, and entirely unique. Through the structural safety of Company 8, the paternal protection of Captain Obi, and the unflinching peer validation of Arthur, Shinra finally gains the psychological resources required to melt his frozen grief. He begins to allow himself to weep for the family he lost, shifting his motivation from a desperate, panic-fueled attempt to justify his existence to a calm, purposeful dedication to protect the living. He stops running from the devil label imposed by society, and he stops hiding behind the rigid mask of the idealized hero. Instead, he achieves a profound psychological synthesis. He accepts that he can possess the terrifying, explosive ferocity of the flames while maintaining the pure, compassionate heart of a savior. When Shinra reaches his final state, his smile changes. It is no longer the rigid, involuntary muscular spasm of a terrified child trying to hide his tears. It becomes a genuine expression of peaceful, self-assured confidence. He has confronted his deepest survivor's guilt, embraced his internal shadow, rescued his brother from the brink of absolute oblivion, and forced a hostile world to acknowledge his humanity. He did not heal by forgetting the fire, nor did he heal by outrunning the ashes. He healed by allowing himself to be loved, to belong, and to build a found family that could hold his hand through the darkness. Shinra Kusakabe stands as a definitive monument to the human capacity for transformation. The boy who didn't just survive hell, but used its very fires to forge his own salvation. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe.